Good evening, and thank you for joining us. My name is Andrea Piero, and I'm the director of the Visiting Artists Program at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's lecture by visiting artist Trenton Doyle Hancock. We are so thrilled to have Trenton with us this evening, and I would like to thank him for sharing his important work with us tonight. We also look forward to having Trenton meet with students from SAIC tomorrow morning. The Visiting Artists Program hosts a variety of public talks by internationally recognized artists, designers, and scholars each academic year to expand our thinking about contemporary art and culture. You may find more information about the Visiting Artists Program by visiting our website at saic.edu/VAP. I would like to thank SAIC's Department of Painting and Drawing for their partnership, as well as James Cohen Gallery for all of their assistance. Support for tonight's program is provided by Arts Midwest, the Illinois Arts Council Agency, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Just a couple of notes about the format for tonight's program before we get started. After Trenton's presentation, he'll be joined by graduate student Noelle Afric for questions from the audience. To pose a question, just simply post it in the Q&A box below, and we'll try to get to as many questions as time allows. Closed captions are also available by clicking the CC button on the bottom of your Zoom window. To introduce Trenton, it is my pleasure to welcome Noelle Afric, who is a second-year MFA candidate in SAIC's Department of Painting and Drawing. Thank you.
To be here and to welcome Trenton Doyle Hancock. For almost 2 decades, Trenton Doyle Hancock has been constructing his own fantastical narrative that continues to develop and inform his prolific artistic output. Part fictional, part autobiographical, Hancock's work pulls from his own personal experience, art historical canon, comics and superheroes, pulp fiction, and myriad pop culture references, resulting in a complex amalgamation of characters and plots possessing universal concepts of light and dark, good and evil, and all the gray in between. Hancock transforms traditionally formal decisions, such as his use of color, language, and pattern, into opportunities to create new characters, develop subplots, and convey symbolic meaning. Hancock's works are suffused with personal mythology presented at an operatic scale, often reinterpreting biblical stories that the artist learned as a child from his family and local church community. His exuberant and subversive narratives employ a variety of cultural tropes, ranging in tone from comic strip superhero battles to medieval morality plays, and influenced in style by Hieronymus Bosch, Max Ernst, Henry Darger, Philip Guston, and R. Crumb. Text embedded within the paintings and drawings both drives the narrative and acts as a central visual component. The resulting sprawling installations spill beyond the canvas edges and onto the gallery walls. As a whole, Hancock's highly developed cast of characters acts out a complex mythological battle, creating an elaborate cosmology that embodies his unique aesthetic ideals, musings on color, language, emotions, and ultimately good versus evil. Recent projects include, in November 2020, the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston unveiled Color Flash for Chat and Chew, Paris, Texas in '72, Hancock's Monumental Tapestry Commission, which will remain on permanent display in the museum's new Kinder building. In 2019, a major exhibition of his work, Mind of the Mound, Critical Mass, opened at Mass MoCA in North Adams, Massachusetts. In 2014, his retrospective Skin and Bones, 20 Years of Drawing, at the Contemporary Arts Museum in Houston traveled to Akron Art Museum in Ohio, Studio Museum in Harlem, New York, and Virginia Museum of Contemporary Art. Hancock was featured in the 2000 and 2002 Whitney Biennial exhibitions, at the time becoming one of the youngest artists in history to participate in the prestigious survey. Hancock's work is in the permanent collections of many institutions, including the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York, the Met, Studio Museum in Harlem, Brooklyn Museum, and San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, among numerous others. So please welcome Trenton Doyle Hancock.
Okay, well, thank you, Noelle and Andrea, for that amazing introduction. And Thank you to the School of the Art of Institute of Chicago for inviting me. I know you first invited me a few years ago, and many factors prohibited me from actually coming to Chicago, but I am so happy to finally be able to speak to you and your student body and many others. The talk I'm going to give today is it's slightly modified from my last couple of talks because I always like to update with the latest um, shows and the newest things that are going on. So that means some things have to get pushed out that they don't make the cut any longer. So you'll be seeing some of my most current work. I'm trying to keep it to the last 10 years of stuff in this lecture, except for the very beginning, which will be um, let's see, the kind of introducing the characters and themes and so on. So I'm going to try to do the screen share thing now. All right. So here we have Roher van der Weyden and the deposition from the cross. This, I'm showing this image just to say it's always been one of my favorite paintings. Obviously, I went to painting school, and that's my primary interest. It ties with my other primary interest, which is pop culture in general. And but this is my go-to painting when I want to tell people the power of painting. I remember going to Spain and I saw this piece in person for the first time after loving it for years. And I was actually brought to tears. It's not something I expected to happen, but I had that experience that some of us are lucky to have, where a painting just cuts right to your core and makes you understand why it's such a long lasting way to transmit ideas and imagery. And then my go-to when I want to describe how powerful pop culture can be, namely painting, I mean, not painting, but film and how it connects to a mythology and world building. I go to George Lucas and Star Wars because it's an equal influence for me. And it excites me, the idea that you can have an additive process where you build a world of characters, forms, material, um, and ideas, and you can kind of make up your own script. In fact, we have to as artists figure out, we have to write our own script and then go with it, and you can amend it along the way. But it's this exciting thing where um, at least I think about my whole project as a film, like as filmmaking, even though it might incorporate ideas, in actual film and video, but even the painting, I, I, I always have thought of it as, okay, I'm building this or making this movie. So here's me, age almost age 3, age 2, and some change, uh, with one of my favorite toys. So I'm going to show a couple of pictures of me as a kid playing with toys. Um, this is me a little older. Uh, Someone should have told me to zip up my fly for this photo. My mom, I owe her for that. But that's one of my favorite robots there, Alfie the Robot. And I think this was around 1980 or 81. But you'll see how this love of toys as mostly plastic uh, objects and the color and the material of the toys has stayed with me and informed how I approach painting. Here's a very early piece. I say early. This is, yeah, from age 8, 7 or 8 or something. And my mom's name is Carolyn, so I made this for her. She still has it hanging up at home. It's just crayon on manila paper. But that kind of way of puzzling together forms to create an image, it also comes back. So one of the themes that I'm going to talk about in my work is how things tend to, you can't escape yourself. As an artist, you're constantly um, having to reckon with this younger version of yourself. For me, it was an exciting thing. I never fought it, you know. In fact, I'm lucky that I saved all of these drawings and things from my childhood so I can constantly refer to them to help me as, you know, an artist now in my studio, because younger version of me, I feel never wasn't tainted or corrupted by anything and was just going on autopilot, making the truth. So I constantly mine that material and look for the truth. So that character or that kind of drawing or little painting became a character named Painter, who is in some way an aspect of my mother. And she's a goddess, the goddess of color within what I call my mound verse. And you can see evidence of that kind of color uh, throughout my practice, throughout the years. I grew up in a hyper-religious household, and I feel like I have since gained a more objective idea of what all of that meant. I no longer consider myself a Christian, but I do look back on my childhood and see it as quite unique. And again, there's a paternal energy in my mound verse, a character that I created called Lloyd, who's a very black and white, Old Testament judgmental kind of an energy. And it acts to balance out the painter character, who's, you know, the goddess of color. But I see them both as my mother. You know, they're just different halves of her. And here's an image called Judgment Number 2. It's from around the year 2000. And this character, which is a void in the middle, is shouting these words, "You deserve less," and impaling all of these people. This is from when I was around 10 years old. I created a character named Torpedo Boy. And Torpedo Boy was me. And I'd take my glasses off and I would become this superhero. Um, and it was a way for me to address the fact that I wasn't feeling very popular in school. I was just told that I needed to wear glasses, and I was already a nerdy kind of a kid, but that really pushed it over the top. So I was constantly called professor or nerd, and you know, this and that. But I would go to the drawings and find a sense of agency and power through those drawings and the stories that I made up from the drawings. So I was always influenced by comic book characters, Spider-Man, Superman, the Hulk, uh, but I wanted to create my own version of that, who was virtuous and um, what I considered at the time to be the ultimate hero. So Torpedo Boy was that character for me. The older I got, the more I started to be interested in this idea of the vigilante or the anti-hero. And so Torpedo Boy started to become that for me. I was able to talk about through him the perhaps the trappings of the flesh. You have this eternal being who is forced to live in a mortal body and on earth. And how did he feel about that? So it was a way for me to, in some ways, process a lot of the Bible stories that I grew up hearing, and kind of talk about the flip side, the flawed side of what it means to try to be perfect, and that's this unattainable idea, but we are constantly pushed this idea of perfection and to move towards it. It's the American dream, but what people generally don't talk about is how complicated um, the definitions of perfection are, and you know, what happens when, you know, that it's not reached. And my mound character, who's sort of the center of the mound verse, is indebted to so many different uh, characters and tropes that I grew up with, one of which is the all-knowing trash heap from Fraggle Rock, from Henson Studios. Also, the character Blob, which is a Chicago-based character made by Bill Jackson, who passed away earlier this year. But he had a little kind of puppet variety show called Giggle Snort Hotel, which aired when I was a little kid. And he would have this character named Blob, who was just a blob of clay that would come onto the screen. And then Bill would put different expressions on his face. Like if he was sad, he'd carve out a sad, you know, mouth and then put these different teeth in there. And so those were actually some of my first understandings that you could manipulate material as sculpture, is watching Bill Jackson from Chicago do this with this character named Blob. And then of course yeah, there's an image of him putting on a bow tie for Blob, who's about to go on a date. So in 1997, 98, I would do these performances where I would become this mound creature, which I saw as I think I called him the receptacle of all bad things on Earth. Like people just dumped all of their bad stuff at this character, and he would just sleep it off and turn it into beautiful colors as he slept. And from doing the performances, I was doing smaller drawings and some little paintings on paper based on that character. But once that character really developed, here's an 8x8 foot work with fake fur and felt glued in to give the character form, but he's being attacked on all sides by these aggressors called vegans. This is called Vegans Do Their Dirtiest Work. The legend is in trouble. There's a lot of images here, so I'm gonna just start zooming through at some point, so it'll be actually like a little movie. Again, in the 80s when I was a kid, I saw Fangoria Magazines. Some of you may know what that is. I think they still sell it somewhere, but it was what the magazine you would pick up to see all the science fiction and horror films that were going on at the moment. And this one is from the early 80s, a film by Tobe Hooper called Life Force. And this was on the cover of one of them. And it always stuck with me. I didn't see the movie until I was an adult, but that image of this kind of emaciated character always kind of stuck in the back of my head. And when I went to create my vegan characters, who are the bad guys in the Moundverse, I made this drawing. This is from the year 2000. And it was only a few years afterwards that I realized, oh, I was channeling that image of from that film Life Force. But the more I drew the vegans, the more they became more alien-like and less humanoid. So I started to experiment with all kinds of bony and rocky natural forms. So kind of taking cues from a lot of the medieval artists, Hieronymus Bosch being, one of the chief examples, but, like looking at tree forms, looking at rock formations, looking at cadavers, and looking at all of the ways things can either develop or decay, and those started to become the vegans. And it was an exciting way for me to, in some ways, capture and channel that kind of energy that I was always interested in. And the mounds became a whole other thing that I could explore, which were about abundance and growing and, these full, plump, almost fruit-like forms. Jim Henson's always been a huge inspiration for me, with the Muppets and the whole universe that he created, along with Frank Oz and many of the other puppeteers and thinkers. So I wanted to create my own. This was a photo shoot I did in 2000 and I think 4 or 5, where I wanted to create my own version of Jim Henson's Muppets, like a promotional photo. But this was about a vegan who wanted to be a good vegan. He didn't want to kill mounds. He wanted to accept them and ask them for their blood so that they could use this pink substance in rituals and take hits of it and become drunk on color. And therefore they could regain their humanity. This was Saint Sesame in the middle. I'm dressed as him. And all of the 8 other vegans around him are the cult of color. And that was a whole, I want to say it was almost a 6-year-long body of work that talked about these vegans that wanted to be good. But purist vegans caught wind of what they were doing and wanted to shut the operation down. I was approached by Ballet Austin in Austin, Texas, and they wanted to adapt that particular body of work. And this was in 2005. We worked on this ballet called Cult of Color, Call to Color for 3 years, and it debuted in 2008. And that working on that production, which was a multi-institutional endeavor, including the Fabric Workshop and Art House in Austin, Texas, and obviously the ballet and all of my galleries were involved. It was just this concerted effort to make that piece what it became. I learned a lot during that period. And from there, I started to take on more commissions to do public art pieces. And this was a work called A Better Promise, which was a take on a painting named called The Bad Promise, but this was The Better Promise. And it's super colorful with a giant hand, and it's raining almost like Skittles or, colorful rainwater. And the rainwater is being collected in these vitrines at the bottom. And the public was encouraged to bring their unrecyclable plastic tops and drop them into the appropriate colored bin. So it became this way to get trash off the street, but also for to create this bridge between the artist, which most people I don't get to meet them, but a way for people to engage with the work and become the work. And in rainy, kind of gray Seattle, I wanted to create this work that was about color and about giving. And it was also like a big giant toy to me. So this was me kind of making good on that promise to my younger self that I would continue to be interested in toys. And shortly after that, I went through some bad, relationship experiences. A few very important people passed away in my life. So there was a lot of loss at around the year 2009, 2010. And I started to rethink a lot of what was happening in the studio. The whole cult of color work was sort of dwindling to an end. And I started to think about metamorphosizing and ways to, like, what was the next step? What was the next phase for me? So there was a lot of processing that needed to be done. This is an image from one of my favorite films, An American Werewolf in London, where this character, David Kessler, is throughout the film going through a metamorphosis to become a werewolf. And some of that included having weird dreams. And this is just one of the weird dreams. So this is the type of work I was making around that time. Everything was hyper dark. There was no color almost, except for maybe highlights of pink. And I saw myself almost be mummified by the mound character. So I myself became this kind of humanoid version of my work, like this walking version of my studio. Um, that when I looked at this piece, it almost seemed to have a sentience, like it was trying to tell me something about what was coming next. And I wasn't sure exactly what that was, but I knew it involved opening my studio up and my practice up to include other things that weren't painting, you know. And this is a collaborative film, or it's the title cue page of a film called What the Bringback Brought, where it's about a 6-minute piece where I slowly transform into a character called the Bringback, which is this character that I just showed. And so here's this kind of mummified version of me with these googly eyes staring back at the camera. And I started to understand, oh, this is a way I can talk about and tell people that I want to do something different. I want to, I'm not going to stop painting. The paintings will still be there as sort of the foundation of what's happening. But on top of that, I want these films to start to come out, and animations and toy design. So I saw this character, the Bring Back, as going back into my past and bringing back to the future all of that stuff that influenced me to become a painter in the first place. But now, instead of that stuff being um, just background material, it can be in the forefront where the paintings then take a little bit of a backseat to them. And ultimately, this whole project culminated with the Mass Mocha Show from 2019. But it was about a 10-year process of building, a slow incline of experimentation, working with different animators and sculptors, and a lot of kind of behind the scenes stuff that no one saw for a long time. And I started really paying attention to the design of toy logos and toy packaging, and realizing just how beautiful a lot of that stuff really is. And it just ends up in the trash can and people don't really talk about it, but there's something long standing and very kind of uh, calculated in a way that it's meant to be pleasing to the eye, because obviously it's meant to sell product, but there's something about the truth I see when I look at that logo of Mattel. It makes me feel like I'm at home. It makes me feel like I'm safe, which is a very weird thing to say or admit. The same with Kenner. So I made up my own version of that, TDH Properties, which was able to sort of blanket over all of the projects I was doing. I'm just going through some of the, logos that meant a lot to me as a kid. And then, of course, Mind of the Mound was even more of a particular kind of branding that I created, which talked maybe more about ideas, and this idea of the mound being at your most intuitive. Like, what are your go-tos? What are the things when you're not even trying to be creative, or uh, what do you make? And everyone kind of is, I see everyone as a mound, and we all have our very particular rhythms. So we're all connected in this lattice work that I call the mind of the mound. I worked with Ringling School of Art in Florida, and we had a show of the film that I showed you the title card earlier, along with a lot of the props and things that were in the film. And I worked with a designer, Mark Murphy, to create a little catalog for that. And this was the painting on the front of that catalog. And I've always kind of thought of this bring back character as a kind of a Santa Claus character who's bringing all of this stuff and kind of depositing it before me. So now I'm going to kind of go through some of the paintings that deal with this metamorphosis. There's going to be around 60 in this series. I'm almost finished with it, but I'm just going to show you a few of them. And it's almost dreamlike. It's not, you won't be able to follow it like this happened, and this happened, but there's this kind of logic that rests in how the forms and symbols are reused and remanipulated to then become a whole different kind of picture. This one's called Skullduggery. Every so often, I'll just throw in a title. This is, I don't believe he brought me this far to leave me. Head tread. Letting. As you now enliven a test, set an evil new on USA. Gray remains of a friendship scarred. These are, started to think of some of the paintings from that series as busy boxes, which are these things made by Fisher Price that you would hang in a baby's crib that I had when I was a kid. And they had all of these moments in them that are supposed to stimulate, hand-eye coordination and promote, critical, thinking skills for, a baby, a small child. But there's something about the arrangement of these little moments or tests on these pieces that really are exciting to me. And so I started to think of these works, these in particular, as busy boxes. And you'll see in a lot of my work throughout, definitely my whole career, these plastic tops, which I gathered from the trash and fill them with foam and am able to then glue them onto the paintings. So then you have this almost a growth of plastic from the plastic paint, from the acrylic paint. You have these moments where you get these blisters or bubbles. And this is Once a Man, Twice a Child, busy box. So this one is directly related to that idea of a busy box. And here's an illustration of a bring back in the He-Man illustration style. These are illustrations for a mound toy that I made with Graphic Studio in Florida. Worked with a sculptor named Anna Brancesco to do a series of vegans and Torpedo Boys. There's other, vegan concepts. And this is a Mattel toy from the 70s that I used as a jumping off point to create the Moundverse infants. In I think it was 18, I was able to realize a project with Tyler School of Art, my alma mater. They invited me back to be the distinguished alumni. And with that distinction, I was able to work with their sculpture department to create a new sculpture. And I chose to create a line of toys based on my characters, but as children, called the Moundverse Infants. And these are actual toys that you can go on my website and purchase if you so choose. If you just want to waste money, you can do that. And another corner of pop culture from the 80s that influenced me immensely is the Garbage Pail Kids, which I found my home, my humor collecting those cards, because not only were they, I thought, beautifully painted, they would often bring in puns from pop culture. So a lot of times my first time hearing about concepts and characters, people that were important, was through Garbage Pail Kids. It was some of my first history lessons that I cared about anyway. So I started to make my own. And I was invited to Qatar, the Virginia Commonwealth campus in Qatar, and they had a printmaking facility over there, which you could do anything you wanted to do. And they told me they had a vacuum forming machine, and and I said I'd love to do a project where I create Halloween masks. Because as a kid, my folks were hyper religious and they wouldn't allow me to go trick or treating. But the one time that I did, I was Jaws. But I said, I'm going to make my own characters. Here's Torpedo Boy and a bringback. And this is some shots of me in the studio working with the vacuum form machine and some of the outputs, finessing these outfits, which we found the exact material that was used by Collegeville, which was the company that made the Halloween costumes in the 70s and 80s. And this is a shot from Mass Mocha. I worked, it was an amazing culmination of so many projects that we were able to put under one roof at Mass Mocha. I worked with the curator, Denise Marconish, and we just had, the institution, they gave me free reign to do whatever I wanted to do in this immense space, and provided the resources, and anything that I asked to do, they're like, yes, we can do that. And we all, collaborated and found ways to make these, big installations happen. But this is a recreation here of my grandmother's house with the cross that's also like Torpedo Boy's T, sort of keeping these trick-or-treaters away from the house. And here, when you go around the back of the house, you can see her den area. And playing on the television is this Christian propaganda from the 80s that was basically demonizing and villainizing all of the toys from the 80s. Even Barbie and Rainbow Bright weren't safe from their scrutiny, but definitely He-Man and all these characters were. They're like, if you have this in your house, you should burn it immediately, which my mother did. She took my He-Man toys and torched them behind the house. And obviously, and that affected me quite a bit. But I say, if she hadn't done that, I probably wouldn't be the artist I am today. And I'll just sort of zoom through these. Hopefully the screen doesn't freeze again. And part of this is, we made a giant mound, like a 30-foot tall mound that you could walk inside. And you see here, a large part of my toy collection is displayed on the ribs of this mound. And in different parts of the installation, which is the size of a football field, yeah, you see pockets of toys everywhere. And when you look at this installation from above, it really does look like a giant board game that you can walk through. And you'll come to these stations, as I called them, and then you go in and have an experience. For instance, inside this mound is the film that I showed you earlier. Once you get to this part of the installation, well, I worked with, I'm going to plug these two institutions I worked with. Cinnabar Fabrications in LA helped me make the armature and the head of this mound creature. And I also worked with Otobashian Rug Company in Miami to create the fur, like the actual fur rug that is wrapped around this mound. And so you'll see it here as a finished product. And this lady is going inside, and what's in there is an animation that's playing. So I think the next thing I'm going to show is a 5-minute animation.
Oh boy, here we go. Walking through the woods, here we are. Oh my God. I've been walking forever, it seems. Good grief. Oh, what's that up there? Something ahead, jeez. I'm almost there. Okay. Oh my God. Here we are. Oh, yellow, blue, green, red. Yellow, blue, green, and red. Yellow, blue, green, red. Okay, here's the yellow. Let me get some of this. Oh, that looks great. Let's get this here in the bucket. There it is. Just shake it off. Just shake it off right there. Good. Okay. Oh my God, look at that green. Get that, that's beautiful green. Okay, squeeze. Ah, good. Pick it up. Pick it up. Yeah, in the bucket. Oh, this feels great. Oh, wonderful. You're such a wonderful creature. Amazing, amazing. You're really great. I really like you a lot. Here we go.
So yes, this is the goddess of, she is part of a race of creatures called Celestians, and their whole reason of existing is to, when stars in solar systems go out, they put new ones in, and different solar systems have different colored stars, and so these characters do that, but somehow these characters were kidnapped and became the souls of mounds on Earth. And it's the reason mounds can generate color is because they have these souls in them. So Undum is one that I'm focusing on right now. You can advance to the next one. And here we're seeing a blow up of a comic book that I'm creating, where I'm working with my friend Tom Neely, who's an amazing comic book artist, and we're producing basically an encyclopedia of all things mound. And here we have a cutaway. Next, please. This is another part of the installation at Mass MoCA, where it was just highlighting a lot of the Becoming the Toy Maker series. So you could see, a lot of them in succession. Next, please. And all throughout the installation, there are cutouts of characters from the Moundverse. Some of them are scarier than others. This is the character Lloyd, who I showed you earlier in the presentation, who is this very judgmental character. He's still a good guy, but he's, a little bit on the scary side. Next, please. And here's a hidden part of the installation. If you wander through the Soul of Wit, you enter into another room, and then you see this diorama of the Bring Back character sitting behind his desk with all of these toys behind him. Next, please. And here's that overview shot looking down on the floor. And so you can see what I was talking about, where the whole install looks kind of like a board game. Next, please. And here's some of the images from the Moundverse comic book that I've been working on. And you can just kind of start to scroll through these. Yeah, and it has a very, very meta quality, where I, the artist, meet up with other versions of myself and then all of the other characters. And then I go through a moment where I address the audience and start talking about the Moundverse and what mound means, breaking it down into various, ideas of, collecting ideas on shelves, all the way to mounds being these characters that are mythological, that live in the forest, but the form of the mound being something that's in some ways eternal. As long as, the earth has been a thing, these kind of rounded shapes, appear in nature, and we create them as structurally, structures with a lot of integrity, geodesic structures. And then I invite you inside the mound, and then we go on an adventure, in some ways, into its biology and how this thing works. And I'm still adding to this comic. It's like taking forever. At first I thought it would be, 5 years at the most. Well, the 5-year mark has passed, and this is starting to look more like a life work with, ultimately over 1,000 pages where I'm only around page 200, maybe right now. But it's kind of exciting to kind of look back at these that are fully colored, fully rendered, ready to go chapters. And it kind of gives me hope for the future chapters that they will be just as legible and hopefully exciting for people to read. And, I love the idea that ultimately people will be able to take this home. Like you can go to an actual comic shop and buy these. Okay, so this is starting. I'm going to just show some images of basically breakdowns of, it's not mounds or vegans, it's just, uh, I call them paintings of conditions, psychological human conditions. This one's one called A Thief in the Night. Okay, yeah, you can just cycle through these. And that's one called Mr. Mouth. When they found me, I wasn't there. Concerto. And that's my grandmother who passed away last year at she almost made it to 100. But these are, some of her great grandchildren, great grandchildren. And I wanted the Undum Angel character who I introduced earlier is my way of sort of talking about all the strong women characters that helped raise me and the ones that have come after me, my nieces, my cousins, just amazing people that I want to in some ways honor in my mound verse. And it all kind of goes back to my grandmother. So yeah, you can kind of go on from here. And I think because we're running low on time, uh, you can skip actually to the last 3 images in the lecture. So yeah, I guess you're seeing all this play out here. There's lots of bodies of work that have happened, in the past few years that I was, going to show. But a study on Philip Guston, who's one of my art heroes, but I thought it would be interesting to have my character, Torpedo Boy, square off with his Klansman character. And what I thought would be just sort of a funny, humorous, one-off image has actually become almost a 5-year project at this point of dissecting what it means, like white supremacy and, all of these things that kind of oscillate between, thinking about blackness and whiteness. And here's another chapter of the comic. These are images from my latest show, which is at Hales Gallery in London, called Water, Ground, Hell, Sky. Okay, and freeze right here for just a second. The strongest, female character in my life right now is my wife, Ju Young Che, who has a show up in Dallas right now called Songs of Resilience from the Tapestry of Faith. And she also has a created universe where she deals with all of this stuff through multimedia, sculpture, painting, videos. She composes the music. And so we've been able to share a life together for the past 10 years. And yeah, it's been really awesome to kind of, be able to see what's going on in her studio, and how she's addressing some of the same things that I am, but from a totally different perspective. Like her universe airs on the positive side, while mine deals with, maybe puts the negative stuff sometimes out in front as a way to deal with it. Next, please. Yeah, and yeah. So yeah, well, that's the last image, but yeah, I wanted to end it off by letting people know that yeah, it's a really great thing yeah, when you find that person and they really understand uh, that what you're doing isn't just the craziest endeavor in the world, that it's actually something that helps not only balance you out, but hopefully other people can see it and feel some sense of community, especially in these days when we're we're socially distancing, that you can be connected, and art has been a way for me to connect with the world, and it always has been. So I've never really felt alone, especially when I have access to art. Um, so that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Trenton. That was wonderful. Well, we have about 15 minutes left for questions, and a lot of questions are coming in. So the first question is, for artists wanting to make large installations, can you tell us a bit about some of the logistics of working with assistants?
Well, if you'd asked me this question 3 years ago, I'd have a different answer than now. But obviously, I think we understand that you, you, you know the more hands you have, and the more people that understand what if you're a good director, you have to be able to delegate and responsibility to assistants, and to give them a script to go by, and kind of and if you get capable people, uh, then you can do awesome things. And especially if you see it as a collaborative thing. I mean, I guess it varies. So like sometimes you just want people to do busy work and not ask a bunch of questions. But other times it can become an environment where suggestions um, can get incorporated, and then really make the work stronger than it was with it just being with you. But I've always in some ways worked collaboratively with people. Uh, I was a printmaker as an undergraduate, and done a lot of printmaking residencies, and I've always saw those as collaborations, because you know once the ideas get going, they can stay rigid, and that's fine. You just make what you set out to make. But other times, it's great to have those suggestions. But I guess to answer the original about large installation, it's wherever you're working, figure out exactly how much space you have, and then also exactly how many resources you have to make this thing, how much time you have. Yeah, it comes down to some simple math at some point to do large things. I was told early on by an artist that think big, just think big, even if you don't have the resources to make big things. Always imagine what it would be like to make that thing, and then make notes about it and dream big. And then one day you will actually be able to uh, you know perhaps gather the what you need to make that thing. The right space will come along, and then you'll be able to get your ideas out there. But to never to undersell the idea. so much that you don't even see it through in a drawing phase or a writing phase.
Yeah.
Believe in it there, and then then it has a fighting chance for other people to believe in it if you've already done all that hard work of believing in that thing. So doesn't matter how large it is.
Yeah, oh, that's great. Can you please talk more about the characters called Mound People and vegans? Are there any hybrid mounds and vegans? And is evil and good permanently separated?
I'll start with the evil and the good. I think when I first started the whole Moundverse stuff, I was just coming out of undergrad, where I was truly for the first time meeting people that I thought understood me. So for the longest time, for almost 18 plus, a little over 18 years, growing up in Paris, Texas, small town, it really was Jesus or football all day, every day. And that was the truth. And that's all you knew. So I didn't even know that there was other ways to think. I didn't know that good and evil was a construct, or I didn't understand the difference between, what's, ethics. And, I had an understanding of what was good. And it's like treat people the way you want to be treated, and, things work themselves out from there. But, how it all got complicated in terms of your perspective, especially the more you travel, the wider your circle gets and your worldview, you start to understand that there's so much out there that doesn't fit into that, we say rubric or, idea of the spectrum of good and evil. So from there, once I started to create what I call my movie, the Moundverse, I wanted to play around with this idea. So I created some characters that I thought were the worst characters. And then I created some characters that I thought were the best. And then from there, I could kind of mix and complicate things. And yes, the whole Saint Sesame and the Cult of Color was my attempt at merging ideas of moundness and veganness into one form, but which starts to create that gray area, that interesting space where it's not about the polarity. You don't have two choices. You have now a third choice of being, and which was all about regaining humanity, which, that was the foundation of that body of work. Well, then I created purist vegans who wanted to come in and destroy all of that. They thought it's better to be the way things were. So then I had a war happen. All of my work usually ends in a war, which is just, maybe it's the Old Testament football player in me. It's like, I got to butt heads at some point. It makes the work interesting. But yeah, that body of work ended in a very dismal way, where it was just a battlefield strewn with vegan body parts, and which, yeah, led straight into that very dark period of my work where I was, yeah, really focusing on mortality and the self.
And then we have another question that says, what does a day in the life of Trenton look like? How do you structure your day?
I wish I could say that there was some structure to my day, but it kind of, it varies. I do try to get some drawing, at least some drawing or writing done every day, but we just actually moved into a new house. So a lot of time has been spent just moving things from the other house to this one. And that whole process, which I know a lot of people have gone through that. So yeah, that's where I currently am. So yeah, a lot of my day, yeah, it kind of deals with, getting things livable in this new place. But for the past week, I have been able to get a lot of drawing done, and it feels really good. So kind of back to the old me, where yeah, I can't say 9 to 5 because I really do start working at about 8 at night and end at 5 in the morning. So I'm kind of jet lagged when people actually want me to do things during the day, but like right now. But that the best case scenario is, yeah, I start drawing or painting at 8 and then work all night.
Cool. I have a question for you. So I found the Mound character to be like an amalgamation of so many things. Like I find it cute, but also scary. And I felt like, but during the movie, I was really like sympathizing with the character as it went through all the facial, like the different faces it had. And I was wondering, like, how does that character live in an in-between space? And like, what's the relationship you want it to have with the viewer in terms of like sympathizing or being afraid, or like, how do you think about that?
Well, I think I, in some ways, created that character as a very sad, melancholy kind of a character that was always existed in this dumb space of just reacting to color or getting excited about very basic shapes and colors and things. So maybe, I mean, like a baby in some ways. It's just like, oh,
Yeah.
because a very simple kind of world, a simple way of communicating. And at first it was just a few characters in the Moundverse. It was like Painter, Lloyd, the vegans, and the Mound. And now there's so many more kinds of stories that I think I want to evolve, like revolve around that character. But that character in some ways always stays the same. Allowing, therefore I don't have to place any, like if I want to explore something that's complex in the world, something topical perhaps, it doesn't even have to do anything to do with the Mound. I can go to Torpedo Boy and issues of slavery, or, like I said, Guston, Klan character in white supremacy, and the fact that those two ideas of the painter and what the Klansman represents were never actually bridged over the course of art history. It's only now that we're kind of starting to unpack what those works actually mean. So, and, I don't have to deal with the Mound when I'm dealing with that, you know what I mean? So I think, yeah, the Mound gets to stay this unchanged kind of a character, almost in some ways an observer, but also this idea of the earth as natural resource that we're just mining until it's dry. And I think that cartoon or animation talks about that. Me as the artist going back to this idea and continuing to mine it, even though at some point it looks like it's hurting this thing. But coming with my buckets, taking the color and taking it back to the studio, and that in some ways just like sums up what I feel like the artist, at least I do. And so there's a bit of guilt there, but also this intense excitement and understanding that there's no other way for me to be.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great place to end it, actually. We're at 7:45. So
Okay.
Thank you so much, Trenton. This has been a real treat. I really, really enjoyed your talk.
Oh, thank you so much. And again, sorry for the technical difficulties. I hope y'all got your money's worth. Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.